We got another episode of the NewOrleans.Football podcast for you guys today. It is filled with a ton of topics. We're still breaking down the Sean Payton situation, trying to figure out what's going to happen with him next. That's entering the home stretch. So what are some of the key factors that could come into play for him to get a job? We start looking ahead to the draft and free agency. How can this team solve the quarterback dilemma? It is the biggest issue on the team. Do they go to free agency? Do they look to the draft? Do they combine both approach? How much aggression should they go after that with? We break down all of that and a whole lot more. And we start looking ahead to the Senior Bowl, which kicks off this week. 4 members of the Saints coaching staff are on the Senior Bowl coaching staff. What advantages does that give them? Will they leave this process with more insight than anybody else? And by the way, they got their quarterbacks coach there, so that could be a little bit of an advantage for this team. We are coming to you live from the Better Call BADEAUX podcast studio, and we are presented by Hardhide Ponchatoula Strawberry Whiskey. That is an 86 proof blend of 3-year-old wheat bourbon, American light whiskey, and fresh Ponchatoula strawberries. Based in New Orleans, it is not for the thin-skinned. Look for it in your favorite stores, bars, and restaurants. And if you need legal help with any of the following: car wrecks, offshore injuries, 18-wheeler collisions, Maritime Jones Act, hurricane and storm claims, you better call BADEAUX at 504-323-7777 or 985-303-7777 for your free consultation and case review. And check out our guys, Firehouse Subs, Veteran Boulevard location. Great people, great food, doing great stuff for the community. Spend money there. They're going to do something to help out more likely than not. All right, let's get into the show. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Another episode of the NewOrleans.Football podcast here with my guy, Mike Triplett. Championship weekend is over. What's like the number one takeaway? Sean used to always come back from like this weekend and then the Super Bowl, and it was always, he never said the Super Bowl. Like, I learned this would be like, well, I watched the game. I watched the game, and I saw the teams doing this in the game. What are a couple of your biggest takeaways from these two games?
I mean, quarterbacks mean everything. We already knew that, but we get reminded all the time. I mean, somebody tried to make a parallel with the Eagles and Saints on Twitter, saying, you know, the Eagles revamped everything. They fired their coach. They got a new coach. They revamped their roster. And it's like, yeah, but it wouldn't have worked if they didn't draft Jalen Hurts in the second round. Like, they've got one of the guys. The Bengals have one of the guys. The Chiefs have one of the guys. Saints got to get one of the guys.
Yeah, and look, San Francisco has the system, but then they even ran out of guys at a certain point.
Now, look, Purdy could have been in the Super Bowl, and that could have been a moot point. There are exceptions to the rule, but that's what drives this league, man. You can overcome so many other problems if you get that position right.
Yeah, and look, there have been a handful of teams over the last decade where there have been subpar quarterbacks that have made the Super Bowl, but generally speaking, and it's not just the quarterback, it's the quarterback on the rookie deal was kind of like the story.
I don't know. I'll take Burrow at $50 million this year.
Yeah, no doubt. But like Hurts has like an all-star team around him. Burrow has an all-star team around him. And that's kind of almost like a cheat code almost for those teams a little bit. And look, kind of watching them too, it's just, you see offenses different in these places. Like they're using motion. They're getting people involved in ways that the Saints don't consistently get them involved. The way San Francisco used Christian McCaffrey, they weren't overthinking it. They're just kind of using motion, getting them the ball, get the defense's eyes moving, and get them out of there. Those are things we don't really see the Saints do. And you just see some of the trends with that, how the league is moving. You know, even the Bengals, like they got some chunk plays. Like that was their offense. They struggled to move the ball, but they hit chunk plays. Like you have to be able to do these things to win in the NFL in 2022, 2023.
Boy, Burrow hit a few of those, but there were a lot of just like, let my guy make a play, and it didn't happen enough. One more, they needed one more, but that one to Chase was incredible on fourth down.
Oh yeah, he made a handful of. But those throws are like right on the money. Like he threw a pick on one of them, but in general, you got to be able to make those plays. And look, you saw him make mistakes, and they're still in the game because they didn't have to get 22 play drives every single time. And you can erase your mistakes when you can hit plays, and offense isn't so difficult for you. I mean, it's just kind of like the juxtaposition. You sit there and you're like, man, I remember when it used to be like this to watch the Saints.
To be the Saints.
And it's just
look,
not.
I still, jury is completely out. We'll talk about this a million times between now and then. I believe the Saints are aware I believe there is an awareness there. I'm not saying it'll work. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be, but I think the Saints know that their offense has to look different, and I don't know if they'll pull it off correctly, but I don't think if they were on the podcast, hey, we're bringing out a Pete Carmichael, he'd say, no, what we're doing works. I swear by it. They know. They know.
Yeah, no, they
know they fell behind.
They know. It's just a matter of like, can they fix it? And we're gonna find out if they can or can't. I mean, I understand the thought process behind trying to figure it out with the guys you got, but again, like we said, they bet their whole entire staff's careers kind of on the outcome of that. So I have a lot of doubts about them being able to do it. I understand their thought process, kind of hearing it a little bit, some stuff behind the scenes. Like I understand why they're doing it. That's not saying I agree with it. I get their point of view. It has to work though, and that's the thing. It doesn't matter if Dennis Allen's stuck with Pete or hired somebody else, or they go get Kellen Moore. If you go get Kellen Moore and it fails again, everybody's out of here anyhow. So he made his bet. Does his bet hit? I mean, he has all his chips on the table right now. There's not like well, we got this, 20 in the pocket and we'll see if we can fight back. Like, no, everything is in the middle at this point. And if it busts, he's going to be a defensive coordinator somewhere a year from now or 2 years from now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. More takeaways. Everybody's talking about the officials. I honestly do think the one thing about the officials, and this could be a Sean Payton legacy for the NFL, the only officiating thing that makes sense to me, because people complain about officiating after every game. This one was particularly frustrating to watch how many of them made a big impact, but is when you see the comments, and Sean Payton has made this a lot, the NFL prints its own money. Why don't they have full-time employees? I mean, they can afford to hire officials full-time who spend the off season working XFL or USFL games, who do training, who review the rules full-time. That's the one that blows me away. That one wouldn't surprise me. The one rule change I definitely think we're going to see from this weekend is, I think without a question, we're going to see something about the third quarterback. Either a 54th spot for a third quarterback that, he can't play special teams. You can't sneak Taysom onto that. But 54th for a quarterback who comes in to play quarterback if needed, because everyone is smartly tying that to the concussion rule, which is, if we care about player safety, if a quarterback shows signs of a concussion, you're going to take him out of the game. It's a smart thing to do. Then we can't be going out there just having two quarterbacks on an active roster. So that one, I think yesterday's game will lead to a rule change in the NFL this year.
I do think that, like, when we have these conversations, we kind of oversimplify everything a little bit, and people on Twitter oversimplify. Why can't they? It is a really hard job to do. And no matter what you do, like I saw someone suggest on Twitter, I was reading the timeline last night, and someone was like, well, everything should go to official review. There shouldn't even be coaches review, and they should watch every play. But like, what happens when there's a quick snap and they don't get a look at it? And then people are going to say, well, why aren't there challenges? If you take challenges out of the game, there is no perfect solution, but it can be better than it is. Like, there is a chip in the ball, and we're out here like with guys like, you remember a couple of years ago they had
to
like
replace the chains. Did you see what was that the first game?
It's unbelievable.
It was the first game. They were like, we have to go to the backup chains.
Remember the one time they were out there with like the note card between the ball and it's just like there is a chip in the ball. And again, it's probably not perfect, but we're out here, doing stuff like by the human eye and feel. And it's just like some of the stuff should be robotic. It's just, there's too much technology now to like, I don't even understand the argument for it. Like, if you want to watch like an old timey sport, like go watch baseball. Like you can do things smarter and better than they are right now. And the league should be forward thinking. They got, you can watch a play and call it up on your computer a minute later and there's a diagram of the play, like right there. Like, why aren't these technologies somehow manifesting on the field in a way that's making the
one thing
game
they're
better?
Never going to correct though? Like, people are going to be on Twitter showing they didn't call this holding, they didn't call this holding. Like, that's the one thing where they're never going to win that. Like, They better talk to each other in their communications and say, make sure we call 3 holdings against each team, because you can call 24 holdings. You can call 48 holdings probably a game if you want to. And that is the one thing where officials get in the way, is when they call it, who they decide to call it against. But yeah, something like the pushing the quarterback out of bounds last night. Unfortunately, the timing stunk on that, but that one shouldn't have surprised anyone.
He was well out of bounds. He was well out of bounds. It's just you hate to see a game end on that. And the argument that I saw for that was just that well, they shouldn't call it at that point in the game, but like, what if it happens earlier in the game? Like, it's still part of the game. Like, if you can't do this,
tough.
you can't do it. But yeah, I hate to see that 100%. It's that game was so great. And then all of a sudden it's just like, I got so sick of seeing that dude by the end of the game.
Man,
I didn't want to see his face anymore.
I don't know if I've ever seen a referee that many, like, because, I was glued to the set because of the severity of the game, or, the significance of the game. Whereas, usually on a Sunday, I'm walking around the house doing whatever while the game is on in the background. But for the last 20 minutes of game time, that guy was on the screen more than Mahomes or Burrow.
Like, you shouldn't ever watch a game and feel like you could recognize like an official in a crowd. And like, that's how it feels sometimes after watching these games. We shouldn't know what they look like. They should be anonymous. They should just do their job, get out, and it should be, you shouldn't be thinking about who they are and what they're doing. And man, this guy sucks. Like, but there's so many times where that happens. And look, again, it's a very hard job, and it's very easy to sit here and say like this and this, but like, they aren't making enough efforts.
Here's what I care about most as a viewer at home is, did they get it right? Like, I can get over everything else. And even that weird, they replayed the down. I didn't care. I wasn't invested enough. If I was a reporter, I would have really gotten down to it. I probably would have watched replays from different angles to see, was the guy doing this in the background? I don't know for sure. But if they got it right, they got it right. Like, that's all we really care about. The pass interference for the Saints, like should they have called holding? That stuff, that's probably impossible to change. But the big stuff, did they get it right? It was funny. What was the pass interference with about 5 minutes to go? It was
horrible.
It was when the Bengals were getting just a barrage. It was like everything was going, everything. The fix is in. Obviously, they don't want the Bengals to win or whatever. I'm like, and now they called pass interference against them. And I watch it and I go, oh, well, that was really bad pass interference. They had to call that one. Not the Eli Apple one, the shoving the guy in the back one. And I was like, well, they had to call that one.
I thought you were talking the one where they said he like hooked him and he didn't he didn't turn it off. That was an absolutely. I think that was on Bates actually, and that was just horrible. Yeah, I get annoyed when people are like pulling up every time the holds and all. It's like, dude, you can't catch all these. Yeah, you can't catch all these. But you want them to just be consistent on both sides. And I can see getting to that end of that game and kind of feeling like, boy, they kind of wanted the Chiefs.
If we had the Bengals podcast right now, I don't know how we'd approach this. It's hard not to feel like those conspiracy
you'd
theories.
You'd feel like they got some of the Sean Payton treatment. They poked at the league's eye a little bit, and the league punched back. And that's
the other thing I saw on my screen over again was Zach Taylor just being like, and the whole thing I was thinking was, there's Zach Taylor, the guy who has been complaining about how the league was going to make them coin flip against Baltimore. They didn't get their neutral site game against Buffalo, and now he's watching this happen in the game. Whoever's got nobody's got the version of our podcast in Cincinnati. Nobody does it like us, but there are talk show radio hosts, there are reporters or whatever. It's a tough team to cover right now because that team was good enough, and those were a lot of tough breaks.
If you're someone that feels like the league slaps back at people that get out of line a little bit, there's another piece of evidence right there. And speaking of the league slapping back at people, there's kind of like a conspiracy theory floating out there about maybe the league trying to sabotage Sean a little bit about in the coaching search. I don't know if I buy into that fully, but I don't fully dismiss it either. I mean, there is definitely some bad blood there overall, but in the Sean coaching search, just kind of, it feels like. Look, I know one of the thought processes was that like the longer it went on, the more it seemed like he was going back to Fox. I feel like maybe it's starting to reverse a little bit, and
that might be wishful thinking, but
more and more people are dropping out. My point is, it feels like if Sean were to look, there's a bunch of things to get into here because like I think that it's.
Let's hold it to Denver for right now. Denver and Arizona, I think, are two different situations. Arizona, all along, we've thought that was going to be a hard sell because their owners don't usually spend that much. The Bidwell family doesn't usually spend that much. They don't necessarily believe in making a big splash. They don't necessarily believe in the one big power figure. And before they ever even interviewed Sean Payton, they hired their GM and they hired their college scouting director. So for a lot of reasons, I think he's still in play in Arizona. But Denver is the one that's really strange here. I think that we keep getting reports. He's in, he's out. They've done this, they've done that. He has an interview scheduled. He doesn't. He hates the owners. He loves the owners. Like, Denver is weird, and I cannot wait to unpack what all was going on because I just think there's been a lot of misleading reporting, and that one does make me hope, wishful thinking, because I'd like to see Sean get a job this year for the Saints' sake, that's just a lot of cat and mouse behind the scenes negotiating techniques, and that's why what Denver thinks of Payton and what Payton thinks of Denver is being reported by the hour almost.
Yeah. So one thought process for me though is that this has went on long enough to the point where it feels like people have dropped out of the situation a little bit, and that's
or there was
opened it
even a
up.
report that people have been told they're out.
Yeah, they're told they're out, and then you see Gannon last night after the game, and I don't know if he was caught up in the emotions or whatever, but he said he was staying in Philadelphia. I'm taking that at face value. So that seems like it takes a guy out, and if Harbaugh's out, where do they go at this point? It doesn't feel like if you're hiring a candidate now, like I don't think you can sell the idea of, well, this person was kind of on par with him, and it was a little bit cheaper, and we think there's a lot of upside. Like it kind of feels like there's a lot of long shots in this class, and then there's Sean Payton. If you are a serious team, serious about winning right now, that's a hard sell to say that, okay, we didn't want to go to him. The argument, obviously, we value the draft picks more than we value a coach, but if that's your thought process, in 2 years, you're probably going to be hiring a coach again. And it just feels like to me that if one of these situations were going to hit, because I do think that Sean went out there, and I think a few things happened. Like he went out there thinking he was going to be recruited, and he clearly wasn't recruited by these teams. Like the market wasn't what he thought it was going to be. It wasn't probably what the Saints thought it was going to be. It wasn't what we thought it was going to be for him. We thought one of these teams had to sell Sean on a situation. Clearly, Sean needs to sell them on Sean. At this point, he's went through the process. I don't know if his mentality's changed a little bit, but it has set up, I think, for him possibly for one of these teams to maybe circle back and kind of view him a little bit differently if they thought the price was too high before. You're at least sitting around now saying, is this worth it? And maybe that turns the tides a little bit. I feel more optimistic about him getting a job today than I did a week ago. I thought it was over about a week ago.
When it was a week ago. Yeah, it depends. Maybe Monday we were optimistic. Wednesday we weren't.
Yeah, but it felt like it was kind of steering away from him. And then last night I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, if they told all these people they're out of it, and now Gannon's out of it.
Denver's so interesting to me. Now, I do think, though, that Sean is interviewing these teams as much as they're interviewing him. I think it's both.
Sure.
And I think if he goes back to Fox, it's because, he wasn't all in. If he was all in on one of these jobs, like this is the job I really want, then, he could probably cater a little bit and give a little bit. But he might be holding hard and fast because he's like, well, it's not the perfect job, but maybe it'll be the perfect money, or maybe it'll be the perfect amount of power. Like we all think he would, if it was the Chargers job, he'd be willing to give. But, for the Broncos job, he might be willing. Well, I will only take the Broncos job if it comes with this, this, and this. I mean, we don't know all of that, but he does. He can afford to be picky. The market's going to be better next year. There were only 5 openings this year. Usually there's 10. These teams all had warts. Maybe there's a couple next year that don't have warts. So, but Denver is the one I cannot wait to. I mean, we did find out one revealing thing, I think, for fact this week, which is. They wanted Harbaugh first. Like he was their top choice, and they even went back to him. So that makes it seem like either Sean Payton wasn't their first choice, or maybe they went into it saying, we're making the biggest splash of any team in this process. We're either hiring Jim Harbaugh or Sean Payton or D'Amico Ryans, who I think was one of the top, even though he's not in their category, one of the top ones. And so maybe right before they were like, well, Sean's going to cost these draft picks and this money. Let's go back to Harbaugh one more time. But yeah, if they end up being a team that hires Mike Kafka or Shane Steichen or Brian Callahan or something like that, maybe one of those guys would be a great coach in the league. But that would surprise me because they seemed like a team that was aiming higher. And the report that came out this week was that they told David Shaw and Jim Caldwell and their defensive coordinator, Evero, and one other coach, I'm trying to remember, Raheem Morris, that they interviewed them, but they're moving on to other candidates. And that did feel like the B-tier candidates, and Sean is an A-tier candidate.
Look, I do think Sean is like interviewing the teams as much, but I don't think this is a case of him sending the plate back. I don't think it's him interviewing.
But he might have been
the
playing hard to get.
Sure, to some degree, but I don't think it's even one of these jobs he wanted, and it hasn't materialized yet. Sean wanted to probably go far in the process with him at least to see where it was, and it hasn't even gotten to that point. I don't think it's gotten to the point where a team has called Mickey Loomis up to finish negotiating or hey, what would it take? Like we haven't heard Sean Payton is the candidate at one of these places. So, I mean, I think it's just both ways. I think it just hasn't connected yet. And there was that other, the report, Tom Pelissero saying Mickey wanted 2 first-round picks. That's the right approach.
Yeah.
That's the right approach. I don't think this is a thing where Mickey's overplayed his hand. I think he's played his hand, and you go to a car dealership and you say, I want to pay sticker price, like you're an idiot. Like that's the same thing here. And it's not like they're scaring people off with the asking price or anything. There's a vague general understanding of what it's going to take.
And they all lined up interviews after Mickey told all of them what he wanted before they ever lined up an interview, and 4 teams lined up an interview.
Yeah, and it's a negotiation process. Like that's the whole league. Like people are used to negotiating. People hire the greatest negotiators in the world to represent them in this business. They go in there, they negotiate, and that's how every contract's done. So no one's going to be scared of an asking price. They know an asking price is an asking price, and then you kind of whittle your way down from there. So if you're asking for 2 first-round picks, what's the reality there? You'll probably take a first and, a couple other sweeteners, but I don't think that Mickey's saying, nope, it's 2 first-round picks and you're out. Like if Arizona called and said, hey, we'll give you a first-round pick and a second this year, like that probably gets the deal done. And if it doesn't, then I have serious questions about how this organization is being run. But I'm actually glad to hear that they are taking a hard stance, because one of the concerns was, well, would Mickey, kind of soften up a little bit so his friend Sean can go get a job somewhere? And then Mickey told us after the season that he was going to maximize the value. And I'm not sure that, people still fully believe that yet, but this report at least says that, hey, he's not giving them away. At a certain point though, the question then does become, do you back off that a little bit? But if you back off on it and say, we want a first round pick, you probably aren't going to end up with the first round pick. Someone's going to offer you a second and hold steady there, because there's always wiggle room.
And 2 firsts, like how this deal is going to be judged is 2 firsts are not built differently. Like if the Texans, who appear to be out of it, I think by the time we're done recording this podcast, they might name D'Amico. I think they're going to have a second interview with him and then probably name D'Amico Ryans their head coach. They had the 12th pick in the draft. The Broncos now, we know for sure, have the 29th pick. Do you know what you have to do to move up from 29 to 12? You probably have to give up a first and a second. Like the 12th pick in the draft is worth 2 firsts and a second. Right. So Denver has to give up 2 firsts or a first and a bunch of picks that add up to the equivalent of a first. If Houston was the team that wanted him and they were only offering the 12th, well, maybe it's not 2 firsts for them. So 2 firsts, it's a sliding scale. If it's Arizona, it's not going to be 2 firsts. Their first round pick this year is 3rd. It'll be next year's first and some change, or it'll be the 35th pick in this year's draft and whatever else. So 2 firsts are all built differently. But yes, I agree that Denver can't just say pick 29, done deal, or at least the Saints are going to wrangle a lot before they ultimately settle on that, if that's what they ultimately settle on.
I hope that we only have to talk about Sean Payton one more time. I'm so tired of this topic, to be honest. Like I just kind of want it to be done. So this is like setting the stage. I hope a job gets done this week, and then next week we're wrapping this up and we're kind of moving on from it.
I'm ready to move on.
Yeah, I like in the only way to move on from it is him being traded. Honestly, like if he's still lingering over this, it's going to be a conversation for the whole year.
We're going to the Senior Bowl this week, and we want to know, okay, where are the Saints? Do the Saints have any picks higher than what are they? 40th? 40th. That's their highest pick right now. 40th. We need to know that. And but all right, let's go doomsday scenario. Everybody was hoping the Saints would make a change at head coach. They didn't. Offensive coordinator, they didn't. We don't know if they're going to make a big splash at quarterback yet. I think it would take some wind out of the sails, certainly from the fan base, if Sean Payton doesn't get traded and we don't have these picks to talk about. Where do we turn our focus next if we find out, if we get the official word that Sean Payton's staying at Fox? Where do we look for hope and excitement?
It's going to be tough. I mean, it's going to be a tough offseason with that, honestly. I mean, I think you start looking at the second-tier quarterbacks. That's probably going to be where the excitement generates from. Anthony Richardson, maybe. I don't know if he falls to the second round. Hendon Hooker is someone that, you kind of start looking at a little bit. I saw a report today that said he's probably going to be healthy for training camp. So that's at least optimistic on him. But I think those are the places where you start to look for some excitement, because otherwise the offseason's a little bit bleak. I mean, in terms of the draft, it sucks. Every time I open up a mock draft, I like go in there and start scrolling. I'm like, I hope they got the second round. I know Mel Kiper doesn't do the second round. I've been looking at his mock drafts my whole life, but every time I open one, I want to see a pick. I want someone to read about. I want someone to start looking into. It's just, it's just going to take a little bit to kind of, get over that hump a little bit. But, some that'll start coming together. Picking in the early 40s isn't that bad. There are some things to get excited about, but it's definitely not, it's not the same.
You put an interesting question in my head. I didn't prep you for this one, so this can be a to be continued as the offseason goes on. First of all, we're gonna have a Derek Carr episode pretty soon, because if a team's going to trade for him, they have to do it right after the Super Bowl. I have a feeling he ends up getting cut, but we'll see about that. But
they haven't given him permission to talk to anyone yet either.
Really?
I saw that today. Yeah.
Oh, wow. But here's my question. I think we all want Anthony Richardson, Hendon Hooker. I'm actually about to go into the next topic, which is the quarterbacks they're going to be coaching at the Senior Bowl this week. But I think we'd all like to see the young developmental quarterback, but the draft is at the end of April. Do they have to? I mean, can they re-sign Andy Dalton and make it clear that the quarterback is going to be a high priority in the draft? Or do they have, even if you want, even if you love Hendon Hooker and you're targeting him with the 40th pick, what do you do with the quarterback position in free agency?
But what if they bust and they don't get one in the draft? A lot of things can happen. Like you could have a rush at the end of the first round where people get hungry and your plan doesn't get
executed. It's hard to be like, we know we're getting one in the draft.
Yeah, I think the right approach is to go at it like you're going to attack it in free agency. And if you attack it in free agency and you feel satisfied with what you got, maybe you abandon your draft plan. But I think the best plan is to have a two-pronged approach. And if you end up with a Derek Carr, I still think that you should be looking at the draft somehow. And I know that's a lot of compensation to put on a quarterback, but I keep saying it, like you can't get Brock Purdy without drafting Brock Purdy.
Right.
And I think you just have to stay in those waters and you got to keep going for it. And you want like a Shark Tank of quarterbacks, of people that are trying to cannibalize one another. And if you
I don't disagree at all with what you want to do in the draft, but I'm just saying, I think we both have draft as our number one choice, but free agency comes first. How aggressive are you? You're the Saints. What are you doing in free agency this year? You're going Derek Carr. I'm going
Derek Carr.
Try to trade for Justin Fields. That'd be my top choice. Try to trade for Jordan Love. Try to trade for Trey Lance. How far are we going? Gardner Minshew, Sam Darnold?
No. I'm just cutting the line at a certain point. But like I'm going big game hunting. Like I'm not talking about Gardner Minshew. Like I'm making calls on Lamar Jackson. I'm making calls on Aaron Rodgers. I'm making calls on Derek Carr. I'm making calls. Trey Lance scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But like there's a certain price where I would throw in on him. It's not a first round pick. I'm making the calls on Justin Fields. Like I'm going after it with the same vigor they went after Deshaun Watson last year. And look, all those will probably be no's. You probably can't get there. You don't have a first round pick.
I got some free agents. Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo.
Making calls.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not paying a ton for Brady. He's 90 years old at this point. I don't know what he has left, but I'm making the calls. Yeah, I'm making the calls. I have a top 5 defense right now. Like, how do I get my offense to a point where that actually works? And it doesn't have to be Lamar Jackson. It could be a Jimmy Garoppolo type. Jimmy's going to get hurt, so I'm probably making a call to somebody else because I need a 16-game quarterback. But yeah, I'm making those calls. I'm going in. I'm trying to solve a problem where. And look, I know a lot of people are like, they should bottom out or whatever, but like, either you're a playoff team or you aren't, and you can be a playoff team and get in.
You can go after the quarterback even if you're a bottom out believer. That's what they were going to do with Deshaun Watson last year. They were going to be like, no, we're devoting every last resource we have. If that means we cannot re-sign any other free agents, if that means we cannot sign any other free agents, then so be it. Because we've got our quarterback. There's no building the roster first and then adding the quarterback. This is all that matters for this team for a while.
Well, like when you are the team that builds the roster and then adds a quarter, like you end up kind of like San Fran's like trapped in hell almost. Like it's like the Jets. They are so close and they just can't stay healthy enough. They can't find the right guy. It's kind of funny. Like I wonder if like this whole setup over the weekend like sets up for Tom Brady to go there and they finally get over the hump. He goes to the hometown team where he's working out in the parking lot in the Montana jersey and everything. Like you see that picture every year, like that'll be up every single week. But I wonder if that kind of sets that up for him a little bit. But it's tough, man. Like I would never be against being San Francisco. Like I kind of love what they built. I love watching. I like watching them play probably more than any other team in the league right now. But it when you don't have the quarterback, like it is a tough position to be in. So I try to do everything I can to solve that problem.
No, I have no problem with the Saints going after that position. Here's my problem is we do this for a living. I mean, and I think about this all the time because I want them to have a quarterback. I want them to be more competitive. I want to cover it as a reporter. Like there's nothing that would bring more interest to our fans and our followers and everything than having a quarterback to cover. And I cannot come up with the right answer. I mean, the ones who are questionable, it's kind of like Sean Payton's coaching search. Like Denver has some concerns. Derek Carr has some concerns. Like Garoppolo comes with some concerns. What would it cost to get? Like I would love to go after Justin Fields. He might not be available. Like I would love for it to be but I mean, like I don't know the right answer. I don't know. The Saints should obviously do this at quarterback. I wish I did. I don't know what it is.
Those guys aren't available.
It's too hard.
Those guys aren't available. They don't hit the market. I mean, so there's going to be something wrong. You know, you got to take a gamble on a shoulder injury sometimes. I mean, that's just going to be what it is if you're going after in free agency. If you're going after Lamar, it's kind of, you're looking at it like, okay, there was some weird stuff in how this is ending in Baltimore. Like, do I want that? But like, you got to make a compromise somewhere. And look, if the Bears bail on Justin Fields, like there's a reason for that too. Like they have questions about, you know, some of the stuff playing the position. I do think that is, I don't know if they'll do it, but resetting your window and getting more assets like is kind of like a situation that would be kind of hard for me to turn my nose up at, because you're adding years with a rookie quarterback. You're getting another piece for it. Like it would be tough for me to not take that avenue if I were them. And it has nothing to do with Fields. It's just practically speaking, like you're a rebuilding team that has the number 1 pick in the draft.
And I mean, you could theoretically trade Justin Fields to like Carolina, who has the 9th pick, or like somebody who's the 5th. You know, I don't have the draft right in front of me. You could trade Justin Fields to, you're picking one. You trade Justin Fields to Houston and get the 2nd pick. Yeah, like you could get both. You know, you could have the first 2 picks in this year's draft with that asset. Honestly, but all right, you mentioned Brock Purdy. I have to call up my list. This is so the Saints have some good insight on the Senior Bowl this week. Ronald Curry is the national coach's offensive coordinator, and DJ Williams is the national team's quarterbacks coach. So it's BYU's Jaron Hall, Louisville's Malik Cunningham, and Fresno State's Jake Haener. I know we don't know anything about these guys, but you're looking for Purdy, and now you've got the OC and the quarterbacks coach coaching 3 of these guys that might go on day 3 of the draft this year at quarterback. That's a decent little advantage, right?
No, it is definitely. You get to know them a little bit more intimately than everybody else, and they also have Declan Doyle coaching tight ends, Corey Robinson coaching safety. So they're going to be out there, and even if it isn't Corey Robinson looking for a safety, like you're around the other defensive backs, you kind of got a little bit more insight. You're talking to other people on the staff more intimately. You're going to know the linebackers a little bit better. Like it is a little bit of an advantage to have your guys on that Senior Bowl staff. Yeah, the process starts right now. Hendon Hooker's out there too, so they'll probably meet with him because they meet with everybody at these things. And you know, if you don't, like, it's malpractice. Like you talk to everybody. Somebody's talking to everybody everywhere throughout the whole draft process. They're going to do 500 and some interviews. But yeah, being on the field, I think is hugely advantageous, especially at those positions, because they are at a place where they need to start pulling lottery tickets. And maybe you get a little bit of insight on one of these guys and you see something and it connects for you.
For the record, the national team running backs that they'll be working with, Rashawn Johnson from Texas, the other Texas running back. He's a big dude. Could be a diamond in the rough because he was stuck behind Bijan Robinson. Chase Brown from Illinois, Cameron Peoples, Appalachian State. Obviously, they know the Tulane running back really well already. I think that's another one. That's going to be our other. I think those are 2 positions. Like, just pencil them in somewhere in the draft. Give me a running back and give me a quarterback. I don't care where you're picking, what your other picks are. You better bring 2 of them into the building.
And they need to find a pass rusher too.
Sure, but that might. I mean,
that might not happen.
That might have to happen in free agency. That might only, I mean, the picking 40th. Do you get your sure thing pass rusher? I don't just need depth. I don't need somebody who can be a young Contavious Street or whatever. That needs to be their next big move. Like, if they have any free agency money to spend, it's probably got to be on the defensive line.
The real money they need to spend is finding a defensive line coach now that Ryan Nielsen's in Atlanta. And that's probably where their improvement on the line needs to come from. Someone needs to figure out how to get something out of Peyton Turner. And we saw him play a game and he looked great, and then he's hurt, and he was hurt all the time in college. Like, it might just be a health thing at this point, but this isn't saying anything about Ryan Nielsen. Like, I think he was a good coach. He got a lot out of his players. Some of it was a little bit up and down with some of these guys. I don't know if that's him or somebody else, but Peyton Turner did not develop with him as the coach. And again, that might have nothing to do with Nielsen at all, but getting somebody else in there that can talk to him and maybe come at it with a different approach, it can't hurt. Because at this point, you were kind of desperate with him. Like, you aren't hitting there. He isn't hitting. He isn't giving you first round production. Maybe somebody gets that out of him. So the one silver lining to losing Ryan Nielsen, who is a very good coach of this team, is that it allows for a little bit of change. And those two it wasn't working. It just wasn't working.
Yeah, no, Nielsen didn't. I mean, I think he was the most valuable assistant coach on the staff for years. And I think the defensive line was the best unit on the team. And I think the development of Sheldon Rankins, who made a big leap from 1 year to one sort of quiet year to his biggest year, and David Onyemata's leap. And
it's just kind of weird that they didn't stay consistent.
But you're right that hasn't happened with Peyton Turner. It really didn't. I don't think Marcus Davenport will be back on this team or whatever, but he's ready to hear a new voice. It's so funny how everybody was like, oh, Nielsen to the Falcons. That means they're going to sign Marcus Davenport. I was like, Davenport needs to change the scenery probably. I don't know that he's going to follow his position coach. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but like if anything, Davenport probably doesn't want familiarity. I think he probably needs something different, but Peyton Turner, absolutely. I wonder, Michael Hodges has done such a good job with the linebackers. I wonder if defensive line is a big enough priority that you almost consider moving him.
I wouldn't touch him.
If that is almost considered a move up, like it's such an important position. But
it's an interesting.
Don't mess with something.
I wouldn't. They might though. I mean, look, I don't like. They know that
if
stuff
Michael Hodges doesn't become their defensive coordinator, depending on what happens with Chris Richard. Yeah,
I don't think. Do you think Richard's out of here? I don't.
No, I mean, well, the Panthers still don't have a DC, and he interviewed there, and they lost out on Vic Fangio. So, but I'd like to think they can protect Richard by just naming him defensive coordinator now. But
the one interesting thing with the defensive line, though, like, and this is just real looking at the numbers, like Rankins peaks and then the Valley, Onyemata peaks and then the Valley, Davenport peaks and then the Valley. Like, need some consistency there. Right. Maybe that's what comes with the next one. Again, Nielsen, like, coach these guys up. That's probably more personally to do. Like, there's some stuff with Onyemata. You look at some of the stuff that happened, it kind of, the peak and the Valley kind of makes sense on some of that stuff. Davenport, I think, has his own issues. That's probably independent of coaching, the confidence issues that he battles. But again, like, it's maybe reached a point where it might not be a bad thing to have a different approach there, just to kind of maybe get something out of these guys, get them back to where they were and shake it up a little bit. The one thing I would say about DA is that I do think that he's made good hires. Everything else that there's out there to criticize about him, I do think that he's staffed his defense really well. Like, he found Hodges out of nowhere, found Nielsen kind of out of nowhere. He had the cachet, and you're borrowing on Sean Payton too here to get Chris Richard in here, Mike Nolan in here, some veteran guys. I think he at least has an eye for coaching talent, and that's one thing that has worked really, really well on that side of the ball. So them losing somebody and needing to replace them, that doesn't worry me too much. The other thing here too that I think is going to be interesting to see is if Richard actually moves up to like sole DC. Is it a traditional setup where he is just a defensive coordinator then and not coaching a position? Like, are they hiring two guys, or is he going to stay in that kind of dual role and they just add one? It's an opportunity, I think, to look at things a little bit differently, and you open it up a little bit. Maybe you can utilize Richard a little bit differently if now that Nielsen's out of here.
Add Steve Wilkes. Get a little something back at the division.
There you go. All right, we'll be out at the Senior Bowl all week. We'll have your coverage from there. Make sure you keep it locked to NewOrleans.Football and members only podcast end of the week.